What's up, boys? Welcome back. Today we're starting off a little different. Got a black box here. Let's turn this guy around and see what's in the box. So I've got something very special here. Came all the way from overseas, from Rocky Goat Racing. So today we're going to be doing something a little different here. Let me get this guy out. Oh shit, that's the wrong one, but I'll show it to you anyways. So we've got some really nice printed parts here, and this is the Ninja Goat. So this is a little Suzuki Samurai with a 3D printed cage. Let's see what else is in here. Got a few more little things here. So we've got, looks like some window nets and bumpers, and we've got some stickers. Looks like we've got a spare rear piece, and we have two interiors. So we have a double driver dashboard, or a driver co-pilot, if you will. Got headphones on that dude. It's pretty sweet. This guy's spotting. So a lot of detail there. And then this is your optional guy, and I think this is to allow fitment of maybe stock electronics. So if you've got the big V1, V2, V3 box, it can stick up there maybe, or it's for access. But either way, you've got some options here. So a really, really unique thing about this kit, if you look on the side, you'll notice some bolt holes. So you've actually got 1, 2, and 3. So you can actually move this skid around here. So if you look at this, there is no chassis. So this is what you call a monocoque frame, or I guess a unibody in the States. But same difference here. I mean, minus this piece. This is, that would be fully monocoque right there. But as far as the cab, so you don't have any chassis rails. So this is your shock mount, and this again is adjustable here, this plate. So this rides, I guess, above your servo. And then, yeah, so it gives you a lot of setup here, but it gives you some challenges with a super tight, it looks like, interior. And the fact that this is all one piece means you're building it and fitting as you go or after the fact. There's no removing the body and just working with the chassis. So I think there's going to be some challenges here, although we're not even building this one. So I think let's actually take a look at what we are building. Take two. So here we are with the actual build that's going to happen today. So if this is the Ninja Goat, this is the Goat Father. Hence the GF here on the grill. And as you can see, I've already gone ahead and done all the detailing and paint work. So this guy actually has a separate little dash. So this guy got some detail, got that all ready to go. And then it has an interior tray as well. This one just has a single driver. So I've got him kind of detailed up. I think he looks pretty good, kind of Gumby-esque. But anyways, little fire extinguisher there. So all the kind of time-consuming work has been done. Got the fuel cell detailed up there. I think that looks really good as well. But I've had these for quite a while. What has put off building them is really me just kind of dreading all of the detail work, and not anything negative about the actual designs here, just the actual way you have to go about painting these, since this is an exo cage, but it's actually molded in. So to get that detail, you've got to do quite a bit of masking, maybe some hand painting, detailing, and that's just time consuming. It's not necessarily hard. It just takes a little bit of time and thought. So this one was my obvious first choice because it does not have the exo cage, so much less masking, but still quite a bit. You see it does have like a tube bumper here. It's got these fender flares I decided to accent and then this little bottom rail. And this actually has 4 positions here, or 4 screw holes. So you've got, I guess, 3 positions, back, center, and forward on this guy. And then you can see a little bit of added detail here. I had some spare sticker sheets from Axial C10s, so went ahead and badged this guy up properly, at least the cab here, just to add a little more detail to it, since it doesn't have a lot of body lines or anything really cut into it. Panel lines, I guess is what I meant. So like you don't really see a door line. There's kind of a hood line, but it's murky. There's a little bottom windshield surround, but it kind of disappears. So I didn't paint that, but there is plenty of detail and crisp body lines here. Not to discount this at all. And speaking of details, let's look at the back here. So you see this nice little GF cutout. It's actually a single brake light. So there's a little LED hole there and a little pocket. And then you can see here this little back piece. So that's kind of a unique feature on both of these. So I guess these were probably developed first with just the cab and this piece on the back. So this is bolts up, and that's your rear, mounting point for your shocks and axle. So then he came up with these rear, I guess, bed pieces, and they interface with this. This has the same type of deal, a little different connection system back here, and it screws through, and it's actually inset because of the cage on the back. So the panel is inset. So a little different, but really the same system on both of these guys. So pretty cool there. And then of course this guy is the same underneath. It's got the adjustable servo or shock mount, I guess, piece here. So you've got different screw holes and you're slotted here. So you've got a lot of adjustability for wheelbase. You can see that masking work I did. So I picked up the cage underneath, taped that. It's got actually 2 bars coming down inside the A-pillars. So this still had quite a bit of masking work to get a nice kind of clean job. And you can see I didn't really care. I had a little overspray underneath, but kept the fenders nice and black. And then one thing on this, since it was printed in black, I did not prime it in white or anything, thinking about these scraping off. So I just started, cleaned it really well, washed it, and then started in painting it. So if the black gets scratched, you see black. If the gray gets scratched, you're gonna see black, but no white primer. But anyways, I think this is gonna look pretty good. I mean, I basically painted it up like a primered out kind of truck, but you can see I've got this motor on here already. So as I was painting this, I just decided to do a little test fitting, trying to figure out a game plan, and it looks like this is too high for the dash and for the interior. So I've got right now a NanoBam forward facing, which you can flip either way on this guy. But I tried it both ways, and you can make it work because of the adjustability of the skid either way, but it's just the height. And I definitely want to get this interior in here, so that's a concern. So first thing we're going to do is switch directions on motor. So I'm going to pull out some more parts that we're going to be using to try to assemble this, but warning, don't know what I'm doing here. I've got tons of different links, so not even sure of the wheelbase. So this is going to be a lot of discovery. And parts we have. So I may as well show you all the cards now. So since it's a little different build, we're going to be doing wheels and tires pretty quick here because there is no chassis. So I'm going to want to mock pretty quickly and figure out clearances to figure out wheelbase. Speaking of wheelbase, lots of options here. These are Injora stainless steel adjustables. So I've got deadbolt rears, deadbolt front uppers, and then a C10 JLU full setup there. Mofo Rockwolf. Gonna put this on a FlySky, so I've got the smallest receiver I can usually find, which is this FS2A 4-channel. Got that ready to go. And then for the motor switch direction, I've got Mofo RC's brand new, I guess this would be the V3 Nano Beast. So tiny little sucker, brought back. I'm loving that he brought it back. This is a great motor. This was before the NanoBam. NanoBam's a little bit bigger, so we'll take a look at that in a minute and compare them, but I've got the standard mount here with the transfer gear. So this will put this in the stock position, so nice and low, like a little brushed motor. So hopefully that will tuck under this. I think this was designed around brushed motors, so that should work. And then we've got the cream of the crop here, the Servo Beast. And that is going to sit on these nice aluminum Mofo RC X15s. So I've actually had these since they came out. I've got a set of each, and I added some brass here to this guy. So I've already done some assembly, some greasing, and you can see I've got some scale hubs already on here. And I like these knuckles. They look like disc brakes, so pretty cool there. The rear, all aluminum, and no mods here, so no brass added, except I guess for the hexes. But these are super nice. I'm sure everybody knows about them by now. They've got the link riser on the back, and then they've got his adjustable servo tray, but it's a little bit different. It attaches to the top here because the axle is different. And of course these use TRX4M like inners, so beefier. That's why they've got the same kind of C-arm. So they kind of share some of that technology, but it gives you a lot beefier axle, and then you get some really nice steering angle out of these guys as well. See there, we're just laying on the diff cover there. These have the rear diff cover that removes like Super 8s, so that's also kind of cool. Gives you a nice clean front. But because of that, these are pretty proprietary, I guess, so you can't use all your typical SCX24 hardware and pieces and parts. But other than that, they look pretty nice, pretty stout, so I'm excited to finally get to install them on a build. And then, you know, drive shafts, and I've got some LEDs ready to go, some inserts for these tires. The tires are actually going to be some of the TRX4M 57J concepts. So you know about those tires. They've got the TRX4M thick bead. So I picked up these Injora brass rings that are made to adapt 1.0 wheels for that real thick bead. And man, these are heavy. And these are just gonna go on some all black Injora wagon wheels here. So nice, simple look for this primered out truck. So I think let's dive in. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is swap this motor mount and assembly onto this transmission. But before we do that, just look at this Nano Beast compared to the Nano BAM, which is tiny, and you can really appreciate its size. So even smaller, even shorter. So this is just going to be perfect. So love the Nano BAM, but you know me, I was the biggest fan of the Nano Beast when it was around. So like I say, this will be the third version officially, I guess, of this guy. So that is just awesome that it's back. And then of course, got the two-piece mount with the transfer gear. So I'm gonna get this installed. We'll come back and see if we can't check a fitment there. All right, got that motor transmission swap installed, and it looks like we're gonna fit here. So I've got my guy in there, kind of scooted up where his hands are near the console and the steering wheel. So there's a little gap there to the back wall. So I'm not exactly sure where this guy is supposed to go, but I think it's looking all right. He could scoot back a little, but I feel like his hands need to be near the steering wheel. But let's see if we can get a shot under here. You can kind of see that motor there, but there's, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 millimeters above it at least. And then the cord is coming up, and I can bring that back down in front of the dash, I think, and figure out where to go with it. The only other option was coming out to the side, but since really these two side pieces are the only places to mount besides the actual like door panels or back panel, I kind of want to keep that open for potential mounting spots for electronics. So I think for now I'm going to move forward, and you know, of course we'll figure out the electronics and the routing of all this stuff, so it's not coming out the window. But in the interim, I was messing around with wheels and tires, went ahead and mounted one up, and it feels really good. And this actually has just the J Concepts foam in it, because once I got into these, I realized these guys are so oversized that if you squeeze them in the inserts, they basically compress the insert fully so you don't get any real benefit. So you don't have much left to go. It basically makes it solid. So I didn't want to do that. The foam reacts a lot better being compressed like that with this ring. It doesn't feel bad at all. It feels really nice. So you can see I've got nice blacked out hardware. It's another little thing that I swapped out. I picked up a hardware kit from Little Guy. They've got kits for their wheels and they're all black. So I can install them like that instead of the silver just to get a nice kind of murdered out wheel look. But anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and mount the other three up and we'll figure out what's next. There's a little bit better shot without the interior. You can see the motor and you can see the height relation there kind of to the dash. So it's down quite a bit. It looks like it potentially could flip and go forward facing and maybe fit under the steering wheel. That's the lowest point, it looks like, is that steering wheel hanging down. So I don't know, that may be iffy. It would be super close. But man, it's definitely gonna be a challenge moving forward. One thing I forgot to mention was how to do just a hair bit of clearancing right here. And you can see that case edge comes right over. I'll show a better picture of that. But not much at all, just a little bit there, and this thing's seated down perfectly. Don't press up on these sides, put pressure here. This is printed, so you don't want to snap it. But went in there nicely, spins smoothly, so no issues thus far with it. Got these guys mounted up, and they look really good, super classic. And I totally forgot I got the deep dish wagon wheels, so nice negative offset. So these look really good. So you can see I'm getting ready for a mock-up here, and I've got the bolts pulled out of the back here, and you can see they're painted gray because I had them in when I painted so I didn't get paint and gunk up those threads. There's little nutserts in there. So this little piece right here, the way it interfaces with this guy, kind of slip it up in here, and then it kind of comes back forward and just slots in. There's a couple little grooves right here that this bar lays in, and then you can see here it sits at the bottom and you want it to be flush right here. So this will just plug right up and screw in. So this piece basically pinches and holds the bed onto the back of the cab. So it's a really neat system. I did have to open up these two little holes just a bit to get this to pop down. And I also had to take off a little bit behind the braces here. I'll pop this back out. But you can see there's a couple little slots, little grooves here, top and bottom in that bar. And those kind of correspond with these pieces here. So I had to take just a little bit off, a little bit of material here so these would seat flush. I found that it was pushing the bed panel and bowing it. So just a little adjustment there, and not much, just an X-Acto and then check fitting it. And as you can see, it was just perfectly flush now. So I think I'm ready to get this guy, kind of the two halves together. We'll see what it looks like, and then see if I can figure out a wheelbase here with all those mess of links that I've got. So I think this thing is gonna end up looking pretty sweet. So made it up. We should be just like that. So we'll come back in a second and it will be. Quick mock up here, and I think I've got it about where I want it. I mean, not stance wise, obviously, but this is measuring out about 145 millimeters, roughly, maybe a little more, a little less, I'm not sure, but I've got a JLU front and a deadbolt rear. So a little bit of a stretch. So the stretch I want in the rear to take advantage of the pinch, and that's why it's slammed, because it's actually fitting between the tires. So I want to make sure I don't get some body interference on flex. And then in the front, with this extreme turning, I need a gap to the fender there. So these are all wonky, but Let's see if I can get this laid back down, get these turned so at full lock, you know, full compression, full twist, I want to be able to not be getting into that fender. So let's see if it's at full twist. Probably won't be that far back, but somewhere like that. Let's see if this measures out again. So yeah, that's roughly about 145, somewhere in there. So I think that's what I'm shooting for, but I think it's gonna work out well. I was able to just kind of slot these guys in for some quick mock-up action. And speaking of that, let's check out the body. So very nice over here, nice tight line. Over here, not as tight, a little misalignment. But I did kind of loosen these screws once I had it in and push the bed up. So there's a little gap at the bottom, and then of course a little bit larger gap at the top before I had it flush. So it's nice, you've got a little bit of adjustment since you're just really pinching that bar across there. But overall, just super happy with it. You know, it looks like exactly what it needs to look like. So I think now I'm gonna do a little more mock-up here. One thing I needed for this is shocks, and I didn't have any. So this will be the second time these Hot Racing oil shocks have gotten stolen off another certain build. So I'm gonna have to order another set, but this is gonna keep us moving. And we're done. Well, not quite. So I've got the links in, and obviously no shocks on the rear yet. Let me mock that in a little bit, raise that up. But I think I'm fairly happy with the actual wheelbase. Did take a little adjusting on the front end to get this a little further forward. As you can see, I'm right here at the fender edge, so looks like that's gonna be perfect. So what I did on the fronts was add a 2mm to each end of those lowers to stretch those 4. And then on the upper JLUs, I used a 1mm spacer. So still getting some nice kicked back caster. Let's see if we can see the angle here, but you can kind of see it's kicked back. Helps that tire when it turns not get so much into the fender. So I think the front end is pretty good. The servo horn is a little bit forward. I think it's gonna be a clash with the grill piece. But I've got that moved forward, and that again was because the caster and the back of the servo wanting to hit the top of these links. So I did my usual trick and took an X-Acto and kind of carved out a little of that webbing. Let's see if it'll focus. But it allows the bottom edge of that servo kind of a cradle into that little plastic piece. So you just take off some of that webbing. You can see the webbing on the bottom. So that's all gone on the top. So it just allows maybe 1.5 millimeters more clearance there for that servo. So it allows you to lean that without locking up your suspension by hitting those links. So the front is pretty good, and I've got shocks in there because I needed to attach it. So I slid this servo or shock mount piece further back. So you have to kind of drop all this to get access to those screws. So that's pretty much as far back as it can go. It's in the furthest holes and it's scooted all the way back. So you can see I've got a pretty extreme shock lean. So I may adjust that a little more, but part of that was due to these 43mm. You don't have a lot of height. So you kind of have to lean, and look at that dropout right there. That's already just a ton in the front. So I'm gonna have to limit that, or I'm also thinking about shorter shocks maybe, but I kind of wanted the oil to control this, but I've got some other kind of random leftover shocks on hand, so I could go shorts in the front, maybe double barrels in the back, and still get a lot of articulation. But you know, we can always swap that later. I can put rubber bands on each side on the shocks to limit them, but there's no place to go from the center up to the body. There's nowhere to attach to here for a limit point, so you'd have to just limit the shocks. But you can see it's nice and low at its max kind of droop here. Of course, the rear is unknown, but you know, that's not a bad ride height. But I think the servo's resting on the hood right now, so I think we're gonna have to come up a little at least to clear that grill. So a little more adjusting here. but it's progress. And you can see I took the motor out just to make things easier. And once I got this far, I pulled out all of my little 3S batteries, and I'm stumped because you really are gonna have to go up through here for battery access. That's really tight. But the thing is, the grill or the dash that's not in there right now hangs down and limits that more as well. So it's, I don't know, I'm seeing it next to impossible to get a battery in from the bottom. So still trying to figure out how we're gonna make this thing run, but I think as far as getting it set up, we're making some progress. And we're back. And it looks pretty much the same, but it's basically been totally reworked. So I'll start at the front here. So I guess the first thing I did was take off the 1mm spacers on the upper links, and that's given me even more caster, and it's allowing me to lean that a little bit further back, that servo horn, to slip behind this grill when it's actually installed instead of hit it. So now my servo can rest on the underside of that hood, so I'm getting as low as I can get there. Of course, there's no front shocks in. And then on the rear, I was planning on stretching the uppers a little bit to kick the axle back to get the drive shaft pointed up with those high clearance links, but I was barely touching the tires. So I ended up stretching the lowers 1mm, and then I stretched the uppers 3mm. So fully clear here, just a little bit of a stretch on that axle and then a little bit of a lean there. So most of the work has been done inside, and you'll notice I got the interior mocked in, figured out, oh, there's one way that you can get this interior in and twist it at an angle, get the driver hooked in there, come in. So I was able to test fit it after getting the motor and transmission in there. And speaking of that, that's one of the big changes. So I'm gonna pull the body off and we'll take a look at it. Well, before we get the body off completely, or I guess get the skid plate removed from the body, I did figure out a way to get a little battery in here. So I've got a little 200. So it looks like I'm just gonna barely be able to come up here, angle it, and go right in, I believe, under that dash. You can see there, and then level it out, and it's going right under the interior, and there's just a little bit of space. So may be able to put some Velcro in there, something like that to secure it, and that may take up a little bit of that height, but that looks pretty good. And then the center of that interior tray is sitting right on top of the peak of that motor mount. So that's a nice feature there. Ended up basically leveling it out and allowing me to just put it in there, and it has something to kind of sit on so it doesn't just fall in. And of course the dash is still just mocked in, but that's good news. You know, of course the wheel and tire are not on there, so that makes it a little bit easier. But just because there is kind of a chunk here that's free, of course the shock isn't in either, but it looks like I will still have kind of a through zone right there. So anyways, on with skid dropping. All right, so one thing I never mentioned was, you can see here my 4 little pieces of hardware for the sides. I'm using little O-rings on those, so I knew I'd be going in and out, test fitting a lot, so I didn't want to tear up the paint. So those O-rings are a nice way to put something there between the hardware head and the paint, and it also gives you a little tension, almost like a little Loctite there. So nice little thing there. And then moving on to the inside here, you can see the big change. That's the reason we were able to get that battery slid over there. The motor is now facing forward. So I flipped this entire skid. So that was a big part of the change here. I had to take off all the links to turn that around and refit it. But you can see here on the rear, that 2mm and then the 1mm, so the 3, and then you see the 1 there, so a 1 at the bottom. So a 2mm stretch on those tops overall in relation to the bottoms. But that ought to give me a nice little lean on the axle and get the skid plate kind of leveled out to some extent. Kind of difficult when you don't have any frame rails, but you can see the lean on that axle kick back a little. And then the battery can just fit nicely right over here on this rail. Plenty of space there. It's just getting it slid in, which I think now confirmed I'll be able to do. And then you can see it sits a little bit lower than this top edge. So that's basically where we end up with this interior. So right over the top of that. And another big difference here you'll notice is I reclocked the motor. So these cables are coming out now to the side. Let me get this untied here. But I looked at this long enough that, you know, especially with it flipped and this being under the interior tray, there was no way to have it coming up. But looked at it long enough thinking, you know, I'm just gonna get this Rockwolf out and test fit it. And turns out, looks like this will slide in there right there, fit just perfectly and not hit the motor and let this cable come out over it. So looks like that's where this ESC is gonna be, and it'll put the on-off switch here at the back. So I ought to be able to just get right up at it and turn it on and off right there. So looks like that's gonna work out pretty well. I'm now thinking that the receiver may go on the back wall, somewhere in here under the interior. Then that leaves this whole area open. And part of flipping this motor was thinking, may as well get all of this kind of bulk underneath the tightest spot here, which is the steering wheel. And you can see I've got it clocked, and I had to turn it slightly to clear the brushed motor, but doing that, or the brushless motor, excuse me, but doing that, it doesn't hit it at all. So there's maybe millimeter or so between that. So it's nice that this has a flat bottom steering wheel, gives you that little bit of adjustment there for clearance. So looks like we're gonna be able to move forward with something that's gonna actually be able to run and drive. So still got a lot of work to figure out. Got lighting, so gonna have to do a lot of body routing. So I think that's a good reason to mount the receiver there to the body, and then I can just unplug the ESC from that. The motor will be plugged to the ESC, so that makes sense to have it drop with the actual skid. So kind of the two components will have to separate ultimately, but that's just kind of the nature of this monocoque chassis build. Back with a little more progress. So having that confidence of the battery fitment and layout, I've gone ahead, glued in all my pieces here, and we'll kind of put that aside as it cures and come back to it. So I've also got this guy bound up and ready to test. I went ahead and centered the servo, got that hooked up, and set the endpoints here. So we'll also put that aside and test that in a second. What I wanted to talk about first is the axles. We kind of blew past those in the intro, but these X15s, I don't think I mentioned, they come fully assembled, ready to run, everything you need, built up. So the only thing you have to install is the servo tray, and it is a top mount, but it's basically the same best servo mount ever that he makes for the typical axles. But these come with 50% underdrive in both axles, so they're just going to be really slow. So what I've done on this setup is put in 213 overdrive, so about 23% overdrive in the front, and then stock 216 in the rear. So true overdrive in the front, whereas both of these have the same 50% underdrive. It'll just be really slow overall. So they do come with metal steering links no matter what. These are the nylon axle housings and C-hubs and knuckles. But you can see the size difference in the knuckles versus these heavyweights that are on here. And like I said, I've got the brass C-arms, the brass linkages, and I put on brass diff cover on the front. So there's plenty of option parts. And then he does sell a brass housing front and rear, so you can swap that in for one of these complete sets, or you can buy the parts from Mofo and build that up. I think you will need some TRX4M bearings because of the larger axles. But that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna build just a third set full brass. So I've got all the components to do that. And then what's nice is some of these aluminum takeoffs are gonna get swapped to the nylon to keep that lightweight, but maybe a little more durable. So it's nice to have all these options. And if you've got, you know, all three setups, you can kind of mix and match to tune your weight for the setup. So anyways, hoping these axles will turn out really nice. Like I said, I've got this ready to go to test. I bound it up, got the steering adjusted, Great steering throw. Went ahead and set the end points. Had to back those off just a little bit, but let me get this battery, let me get this plugged up, reset the camera. We'll do a little test. Let's get this guy turned on. Take a look at it here. So first thing, let's look at the servo speed. Look at that. Look at that throw. So I've got the endpoints adjusted. So these knuckles come right to the axle like a hair. So there's no stress on the servo arm, and they're basically just touching the axle on both of their stops. So had to back them off on the endpoints just a little bit on each side, but that's pretty typical. No problem with that motor can hitting the upper links. Look at that. Be crazy if I really had that kind of caster, but we're gonna be sitting, of course, up here more like this. Still great caster, but yeah, no problem with motor clearance, tiny little can. So let's take a listen to this guy. Did I get twisted here? There we go. So little grumble there, as you saw coming out of FOC, that transition point. So super quiet low end. It's right there. You get out of it, it goes back quiet. But that's pretty typical. There's always a little bit of grumble, seems like at the FOC transition. But I don't think it's the transmission here on this. It's a Metal Gear Poor Boys RC housing. I guess that's the actual motor cover. It's the transmission here since I've got this flipped. But anyways, a very nice assembly from Poor Boys. I've used their transmissions, I guess is the third one. But really tight tolerances, and I did put some Utter Butter grease in there, so I don't think it's the metal gears rattling. Feels like it's just a little vibration on this motor. Yeah. And then it's nice and smooth. And it's nice and smooth at that low end. Well, I'm happy enough with that. I think we'll see if it reacts a little different under tension once I get some actual drive shafts in there and get some load on this thing. But for now, I'm happy. Got the drive shafts in, and a little mod here. So the front is a little longer because I've got this transmission flip. So I ended up using a JLU C10 Endura front here with the D-hole. So those are nice assemblies there. So that gives me much more engagement than the stock. And then for the rear, it gets a little shorter, but since I've got this stretch just a hair, I really only probably needed to trim 1 millimeter. So you can see I've still got plenty left before the links actually bind. I mean, there's no way I'm getting up that high. And then drop out, of course, plenty of engagement still. But I do that with this little K&S pipe cutter tool, super easy. Just cinch this blade down as you rotate it, and it makes a nice clean cut. So I took up about 3 millimeters maybe, but easy to modify the stock shafts. So I think this is gonna lead us into one last test fitting, because before I get everything in there, I think I wanna verify we are good to go. So I may try some limiting straps, and I think I'm swapping springs right now. I've already got the mediums in here for the front, so I think I'm gonna do the same for the rear. A little more support, and then pull those down with some limiters. And then the last thing here I guess we'll take a look at before I get it refit is the body glue work. So came in and just did a little bit of glue on the seam behind here because I didn't want it squeezing out the front. So nice and clean there. I did test fit the LEDs in both of these holes, and they fit super nice. Same on the dash. I went ahead and just put a little bit on the edges there, because the dash, you can see there's actually a little gap, so you don't want glue in there, you don't want that squeezing out. And then here I just ran a little weld kind of on each side. So super clean, and I I was thinking, well, I could take an X-Acto and slice that if I somehow screwed up and needed to remove this tray. But from initial test fitting, it looks like we're good. But I think one last assembly here is required. I may need to adjust this. I did slide it back further, but you can see there's a ledge. So right here, it's actually butting on that ledge. It's sitting flush. If you want to slide it back further, you have to loosen these more and it kind of sits at an angle. Don't really like that. So if I end up having to slide it back, I may slip some Injora spacers underneath to level it and get it the same height as this little shelf. But other than that, I think everything is pretty much set to go. It's going to be one last test fit and then LED, I think, install after that. Quick note on these Hot Racing long travel oil shocks. You can see how they're stuck in the up position here. So that's one thing about these, that when you tighten down this bottom connection, it basically locks up the pivot. So on metal axles, I always tighten them down like this, and of course they can't rotate, and put some thread locker in there and then just let that set up and back them out just a hair. And then that way the screw won't unscrew, but these guys will be able to actually pivot. But it's well worth it. These are nice and smooth when they actually, they do pivot. So I've got some 30 weight in there, so nice slow action. So anyways, I'm gonna let that set up and then get this mocked up, and we'll see what this guy looks like in its kind of final stance. Back with what I think is gonna be the final setup here, and I'm pretty happy with the stance. I lied, I didn't get any limiters on there, but I did take out quite a bit of the dropout in the front. So let's start with this front end setup. So I guess you can see here the shocks are basically vertical. So I got to looking at that front mount piece, and I've got the extra here, and I noticed this hole up top. So you can see that's actually up higher than the tallest hole back here. And even if it rotated up, it's still a little bit taller. So I ended up moving there. So that took out a lot of dropout because I didn't have that lean shock. And I can still get pretty low here with that servo. I'm about maybe 3 or 4 millimeters to the hood. So I was, I usually like to get to the hood, but in this case, if you look at it here on twist, I'm already right there at the tire. So imagine that like 4 millimeters higher. It'd really be getting into it. So speaking of clearances, pull this guy over, get a little bit of a prop stand here. So let's get this twisted. So full lock, it's just perfect. Because the caster, there's actually a gap here to the top edge. When it's twisted, you can see there. And then I'm right inside of hitting. And then if we flip it around, tucked right in this cut fender. So just perfect there. Great clearances. So this front end is working out really well. So really couldn't drop it anymore. I'm getting a little servo horn tuck behind the grill, which is nice. But it's gonna sit a little higher than I'm used to, but that's a limitation of just the geometry. But in fact, look at the rear here. Getting super low on the rear, and you can see in relation, you can get higher mount points for those shocks. So that's another thing. This actually has some forward mount holes there, has some lower ones, but if you've got the bed on, you can't access them. You can really only access like maybe the 3 uppers, maybe 4. So anyways, that kind of set the position, but it worked out really well. So the back can get a little bit lower, and then again, the front has a little more dropout. I guess we level the body. So that's kind of what we're sitting at. So definitely want to limit the front, but it's not too much dropout that the drive shaft is flopping. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. Got 3 mil spacers on the top at the rear, 2 on the bottom, and that got me nice and smooth. And then the front ended up with 2s on the top. So I can get a shot there to space those out, nothing on the bottom. But just took a few tries working those. Let me get this on the stand and kind of see how smooth these shocks are. But they're definitely supporting this body much better with the medium springs in there. So the fronts are almost sitting at full droop, but the rears are about mid droop there. So that's good, because when all the weight shifts, these rear are gonna have to pick it up. So it's gonna have to kind of keep this rear end from flopping due to the front weight. So I think I'm really pretty happy with that, which is good. I think that's the bulk of the work. Well, I say that. We've got just a very, very tiny little bit left as far as size, but I think it's gonna be a sizable challenge to get that in. So my plan is to take all the weight off of this. So basically all the axles, everything, and just have the center skid with the links attached. And that way I can kind of work in and around kind of a lightweight setup. And then I can come back at the end and attach these once I've got all my electronics in there. But you know, cross your fingers with me. We're gonna come back and have this guy with headlights, a single tail light, and able to steer and drive. All right, figured I'd give you a little update here. Did change directions a little bit, but I'm making good progress. So one big change, as you can see, this receiver is now moved to the front position here. So I really just could not fit it with plugs without hitting the actual spur gear nut. You can see that sticking out right here. So that guy's gonna be spinning. So don't want to hit that, and then the drive shaft would have been below it, but just super tight. And then there's also this lip right here that you've kind of got to get above. So it wasn't going to work in the end with plugs and everything, but I kind of like keeping this all open. So that's all battery and positioning. So I've got this servo cord, you can see zip tied here to this upper link, and then I've got it coiled. I just did that with a lighter to kind of let it hold its shape. And then it looks like the battery lead is gonna just make it right here. And then you can see this is the ESC cable that's just snaking around the top, just has enough slack. So everything is still nice and low there. But that will allow me to plug in the two lights, which are gonna be the lower plugs. So getting those routed. And so I've got double side on there now, but I think, and of course it's not attached, but I think I'm gonna go Velcro potentially so this guy can pull off easily, but keeping it clear of the motor can there. So it looks like this is gonna work out quite nicely, and again, leave this fully kind of open for access. So anyways, I'm gonna pull this back off and do a little more tweaking. This ESC ended up, once I got the body on, it looks like it might just be touching the motor. I don't know if you can see that very well, but this edge of the ESC is, you know, without the body was maybe a millimeter off of the can, but it looks like it's touching it. So I think I'm gonna have to take off a layer of double side. I've got two layers, two strips here. So if I take off one, maybe I can kick this thing at an angle. So once it gets squeezed in, it'll tuck under. But that's kind of the thought there. So slow going for sure. A lot of thought, and you can see some test fitting. I had to leave the front axle on, unfortunately, just forgot about that, but the servo is connected. So kind of had to have that in play with the routing. But so far, it's looking like it's gonna work out if I can get these lights routed somehow. Making a little headway on the lighting here on the rear, so I thought I would check in here. So you can see I've got my single here, and I went and wrapped it with some heat shrink and kind of heated it with a lighter to shape it kind of in place. And what led me to this was I noticed a couple of holes in the webbing here on this inner brace. So what I had to do is just widen those out a little bit to get both of these guys through and get this little soldered connection through, but didn't have to widen them out much. But it's a nice little crossover, so I ought to be able to come under the cab and then right back up into the cab and then over to plug in. So that looks like it's gonna work and be pretty clean. It's all just kind of friction fit in here to the side, because again, this is a separate piece than the rear. So potentially this could all come apart pretty easily, and you just, you know, pop off the little plug to unroute it. So not too hard there, but it looks like the rear end is gonna work out pretty well. Still kind of brainstorming the front, so I'll be back. Let's take one last look before I get this buttoned up. Look at that, we've got headlights. So I got these guys routed in, and these nice, really small wires are very handy. You can see there's like a little lip here on the inside of the hood, so they could kind of tuck in and put a little tension there and basically snake under. And then I just secured them with some black tape in a few spots, got them coiled with a little bit of, little sections of heat shrink that they can run through. So this is queued up, as you can see right here, where that receiver is going to Velcro, right there on the driver's side. And then for the rear, I had to flip-flop it. I basically routed it coming out this way, so I need it on the driver's side. So that was a quick swap. But I think once I connect these, I may tape this to the door, and then this guy's queued up again for that receiver right there. So I think now, let's do a little test here. I've got a little extension to get over to this guy, but may as well take a look at these. And then I've added an extension, as you can see, to the battery. Figured that was going to be a necessity to be able to actually plug this guy in. I'm also going to leave the switch always on, so you don't have to actually get to it with tweezers. So look at that. Did the warm white, so those look really nice there. Like that grill just inset a little bit there. But I think that's the final little touch there. I've already tested the rear. One thing I didn't mention is I did have to drill out this hole. It was too small for the LED. So a little less good fitment on the rear than the front, but nothing you can't do real quick. But anyways, I think now with the lighting done and the motor beeping at me, we're gonna put this thing back together. I was all ready for assembly here, and I had my first stroke of bad luck. So, good thing about these wires, they're tiny. Bad thing about these wires is they're tiny. So you can see I had a little wire split right at the connection point for that rear tail light. So I'm gonna have to remedy that, rework it a little bit, so that's unfortunate. But we'll take a look here at the final kind of footprint. So hopefully that battery slack will kind of tuck up next to the battery here, kind of on the right side of the transmission. ESC cable will go right above the transmission there and under that tray. And then all this motor slack is back here at the rear. So that's looking good right there. I went ahead and put some Velcro, you can see here on the battery side. Don't have any on the battery just yet. That's gonna make it hard to get in and out. So I'm just gonna see if that will friction fit. But, looking like it was going good. And sometimes that's just how it goes. So back in action, ready for assembly. And I've got my rear tail light secured and repaired, taped in and ready. And man, I'm just amazed at how small this footprint actually got here. So now the challenge phase of getting all this shoehorned in. Look at that beauty. So obviously everything went off without a hitch. So no issues at all on the install. Look at that nice compact layout. Everything just works beautifully in there. So we've got that whole side open for the battery. I'm still amazed that I got all this stuff to fit in that footprint with a spinning Outrunner motor. But challenge complete. So super happy with it. And you'll notice it's sitting a little bit lower here. So I busted out my handy dandy Hoyles hairbands. So these come in 3 assorted sizes for your pleasure. So I used the longest one up to the center bar, just looped it around, and then came back on each side of the diff. So I've got a true center limiter here. So that's getting the rear sitting more like the front was. So it's still got some down travel, but it's got about a quarter down travel left maybe. And then the front has the little rubber bands at the top and bottom of each shock. So that's basically pulling them all the way down. They've got a hair bit of down travel left, but overall, I'm very happy with the stance now. So let's do a final check on the wheelbase. I'll get out the handy dandy Hershaw Scientific here. So we were just shy, I guess, a 150 range. So it looks like with this squat and with the stretch, we're coming about 149, 150 here. So I want to say a Gladiator is about 155. So a little bit shorter than a Gladiator, but a nice stretch here. So just super happy with it overall. So I think now let's toss a battery in here, turn it on, and get a final look at the lights. All right, got this guy powered on. Got the battery in without the use of tweezers thanks to that battery extension. So that is super nice. These grippy tires, this servo, they're just taking control of this plastic box. But let me flip it around here. Take a look at the rear. Nice little tail light there. I'm thinking, looking at this now, what would be nice is a red lens behind the GF to really make it glow. So you wouldn't see that bulb like that. You'd really just see the GF. So maybe a little mod coming for the lighting, but you know me, we've gotten to this point and we only have one set of wheels and tires on here. And I've got to say, these are the set of wheels and tires for this. But I have so many wheels and tires that I've got to get them on builds. So we're going to take a look at picking out some alternates for this guy. Let's get right into it, and into it I am. As you can see here, I've got quite a mess. So I had to change directions on my original wheel selection, at least for one of them. I had some LGRP wheels picked out, but with the positive offset, they really set in and they didn't look good, again, with this huge hub. So a couple of strikes there. I would have also had to downsize because I wouldn't be able to tuck past this fender. So smaller tires at this long of a wheelbase is not something I want to do. I want to keep them at least in this 58-60 range, but went searching for some alternates, and as you can see, I've got some DJ Crawler deep dish here on the table. So I had these left over. I've used this same set before in bronze on another build, really like it. So picked out some tires for this guy. I've got one kind of test mounted up here. These are Luis RC Champ. So I showed all of these in my last build. They make like 4 new 1.0 tires. And I've got one set mounted up here on this Willy truck. And I've got this out because I was kind of testing the feel here as far as the inserts, because this is running inserts. This is mounted up with the stock foams, but this feels really good as well. So I've only got one set of inserts left, so I'm thinking of saving those for maybe the second set, which leads us to these guys here. So these are full brass Injora deep dish wheels. So I've had these for a little while, and I picked these up originally to mount the 58 millimeter J-Concept TRX 4M tires. But as you can see, we use those special Injora rings and went ahead and mounted those to 1.0 wheels. So didn't have to mount them to these. I think these are just called maybe +1s, maybe. They're not they're not super big, but they're a little bit larger than a 1.0. But since we didn't use them on the J-Concepts, I went searching and found some 58s here from Injora. These are the Mud Paws. So these are the new larger size for these guys. I think they came out in the 53s first, but a great looking old school kind of tread. I think it'll fit the build well. Kind of looks like a groundhog or something as far as the tread pattern, but really dig it, and feels nice, and it's gonna fit the bill as far as height. So I'm gonna get those mounted up. Not sure if inserts or not, but got a little work to do. We'll come back and take a look at both of these sets. Quick look at these Mud Paws on these Injora wheels. And I'm kind of digging these wheels a little more than I thought. I was questioning them being a little bit blingy with the brass kind of accents, but I think it's working out all right. They're picking up some of these brass accents here on the front end on some of these components, and the red definitely works for those center caps. You can see what I mean. You really need a deep dish for these scale hubs to not just stick out and look nuts. But man, these feel really good. I ended up doing the inserts in these guys. They were really lacking sidewall support with the foams, and you can see it's really nice now. Got plenty of support. So the foams were good, but I think just not for the weight of this vehicle. But we got clearance at the rear perfectly, and we've got all the same clearances at the front, maybe just a hair better. Basically the same, I think. But yeah, just digging the look of this guy. Feels like an appropriate tire for this kind of junkyard dog look of this truck. But we've got one more set to look at here. Just when you thought it couldn't get any better, look at this bad boy in silver. Just fantastic. I thought black was the only thing that was gonna work, but wow. I guess these being deep dish really help. But I feel like Homer Simpson here looking at these tires. Donuts. These things just look so fat. Look at those guys. In fact, speaking of how fat they are, I had to bump up some hexes here. So luckily these wheels come with some TRX4M hexes. So you can see the one that was on the X15. So this gives me a little more offset, and I still had to keep them a little loose as far as the locking hub here. And I think it was the tire actually hitting the tie rod here. So I mean, it's just, I think the rim was maybe hitting the wide, you know, the heavyweight knuckle down there as well. But even with that spaced off, you know, it's still getting something binding it up. And I think it was right here, but you can just see these tires just massive as far as width. Just really fill out on these, and the foams are just fantastic in them. And I've got this one out here. This has the inserts, which is really nice. So you can see kind of the support there. So that's the softer insert on the front. So then these with the stock foams, so they're a little shorter than the tire, but they're wide and they're fairly stiff on the width. And look at that support, just really nice. But then look at this squish. So these are vented rings, vented wheels. So super happy with this setup here. Just, you know, don't over tighten these because these basically just lock up. But since these are lock nuts inside, this should be fine. Backing them off just a hair. But man, I am just stoked with the look of this guy. Just fantastic with those kind of raw finished silver wheels. So I think that does it. That gives it 3 pretty sick sets of wheels and tires. Okay, with the hard part out of the way, I think it's finally time to do a little bit of assessment here. So I'm gonna get out the scales so we can check the weight and the bias here. Wow, gotta say, that's basically spot on with all 3 sets there. So 58 and a 59 front bias. So nothing to complain about there. Fairly heavy, but I knew that going in. This body shell, at least the cab, is pretty heavy, so I knew I was gonna want a lot of low weight to balance that. And then because most of the weight's up front, I knew I needed some heavy wheels to keep this planted in the back, since there's really not a lot of weight in the rear. But I think a lot of that is due to just the printing. So like these are solid fenders. These A-pillars look flimsy, but they're really not. There's a tube bar molded under here, cross bracing. You know, you can screw that shock mount in all those positions along the hood. So there's gotta be thickness there for that screw, so it's not coming up through here. And then we saw that ledge underneath. So just a really stout body, which is good. This feels like one of the most solid 3D printed bodies that I've had my hands on. You know, obviously the cage is probably the weak point, if any, because it's the thinnest, but you know, I'm super happy with the balance, and I think this thing sitting low and being limited will help it stay planted. So anyways, as I was doing this weighing and swapping of the wheels and tires, I made a little discovery here. So, you know, before we were having a little issue where I couldn't tighten the nut fully down on this without getting it to lock up. So I just had it backed off a little, and if anybody knows me, they know I don't like to do that. I like to get rid of any binding and have everything fully tightened down. So when I swapped on this next set of wheels to those extended hexes, tightened them all the way down, they bound up as well. So I knew, hey, it's not the wheel, it's something else. So let me pull a set of wheels off and I'll show you in a little more detail. So what this turned out to be was that classic case of the hex binding on the bearing when you tighten it down. So that's what you learn when you get these pretty quick, that if you tighten down the wheels on a stock SCX24, they can bind up. And everybody just says, well, don't tighten your wheels down all the way. Well, that's not the solution. The solution is to figure out what the problem is and solve it. So the pin is what stops this hex. You know, it goes in to a point and then it seats on that pin and it can go no further. So you want to put pressure on that pin. You should be able to by tightening the wheel to the hex to the pin, and nothing should bind in theory. So let's take a quick look at these two different hexes here. So first glance, the back spacing doesn't look that different. It looks like this silver one is better. It's a little more shallow. But if we actually look inside at the depth of the pin seat, you can see the brass one is much shallower than that silver one. So then if you actually seat them on the pin, this silver one sits in further. So that was actually the problem. It was actually putting pressure on that bearing instead of having this little sliver of space like the stock one does. So let me see if I can swap this without dropping the pin. Come on. So I've got one modified that I've run on sandpaper, just held down and super easy to do, just to take a little bit off there. So sliding this one on now, let's get this in frame, and you can see I've got a nice little gap there to the bearing. It's not enough that the bearing can fall out, but if you fully tighten down on this guy, you're not putting any pressure on anything except for that pin, and that's what you want. So let's just test the theory here and put this big boy back on here. Let me get my tool, and we'll get this guy tightened on all the way down. These guys are super big. Let's see if we can get it started. And in theory, we ought to be able to just crank this down. And unless that tire is actually rubbing, we should get no binding from the wheel, because the back face of the wheel is fully clear with this hex extension. So that is cranked down. Look at that. Nice and loose, but not loose on the actual hub at all. So that is perfect. Let's just verify I've got that fully tightened. But that's what you want. You want to be able to have everything secure, super tight, but no binding. So that solved it. So I think now, with everything moving as it should and all in check here, I think it's time we move on to a little tabletop testing. Time to do a little testing here, and you can see I've got a new tabletop setup here. So I've got these obstacles from Carnage RC that are kind of like modular puzzle pieces. And I like them, but I think they're a little out of scale, or you have to leave some out like I'm doing here to give you some space to actually come down from an obstacle or set back up to an obstacle. Let's see if we can get it. Nice. But you can see they're a little out of scale maybe for a 24. I would say if the squares were like twice as big with the same scale rocks, or the rocks need to be smaller for this scale of kind of square here, because it's just, I mean, it's too much like driving through a riverbed. You know, it's just ups and downs and diff catchers for this kind of size vehicle. But if you had like a Orlando Hunter 1/32 scale, this would be heaven, I think. It would actually be set up a little more. But the other thing is, like, between each kind of modular piece, there's a lot of kind of valley gap right here. So they're not set up too well to stack next to each other. It's almost like you need flat space around each one of them to kind of approach them. But a cool setup. I mean, overall, I like the fact you can kind of easily rearrange and recreate, you know, new terrain. But, you know, it has some limitations here, as well as this, looks like this motor in ESC. Like, I'm not as happy with this on the Rockwolf as I am with the NanoBam. That is just butter. Seems like this Nano Beast is a little FOC, a little unhappy at the FOC transition. Let's see, so I'm hung up on an axle right here. Let's try to get up over it. So yeah, it's almost like these squares need to be, you know, twice as big to give you a little more space in between these. Nice, let me reposition. Kind of hanging in the air right here, drop it down. Kind of moving the course with it. Yeah, I mean, just a lot of axle diff hangers here. Of course, I'm not really looking at that opposite side either. Well, you can see these tires having no problem just moving these, picking them up, kicking them around, and got it unconnected. There goes the obstacle. Time out. A little bit wider shot here. See if we can come through here a little bit better. Nice. Settle back down. There we go. Came unpuzzled again. See, it's got to flex out a little bit. Very nice. Nice. These J-Concepts are hooking up on this slick plastic. A little close-up shot here. So you can kind of see that hesitation there at the FOC point. There it is. So I'm not digging that. So I don't know what the deal is. I put a call into Mofo headquarters to see if they had tested this Nano Beast on the Rockwolf yet. But I don't know. May have to play around a little more. See if I can't get that a little smoother. But I mean, really, it's not an issue with drivability. It's not really throwing me off at all. Let's reset a little bit here. It just bugs me more than anything, I think. Not having it just perfectly smooth. Very nice. All right, we get a kind of straight on approach shot here. See what this guy looks like coming up and over. See if we can get by the camera without knocking it over. Look at that. Nice squish on that back tire, nice control, dropping it down. Let's see if we can't get a little bite here. Getting kind of high centered. There we go. Look at that tire just grabbing. Booyah. We'll bring it on out here. But man, that looks good. Definitely looks good. more here. Gotta say, this is a tough test bed. I don't know if I like this as a tabletop testing unit or not. It's pretty hard to kind of compare different things because it's just such a free-for-all out here, but it is a cool setup. Back on the mat, and it already feels better. So we're gonna try this setup a little different. Just take a few of these kind of in a straight line here and see if this is a little easier to handle. And of course, had to switch some tires up here, test out these Louis RC. Oh, kind of slid off. Looks like it kind of sticking and gripping. There we go. There we go. Still rough, still rough. All right, we're gonna run it back, see if we can do any better on this return trip. Maybe not slip off of this fully hung up there on something. We're kind of caught on the axle, so already first hang up. Look at those wheels and tires though, just gorgeous. I have to back up on this one. It's tricky, I'm telling you. But man, some good looking wheels and tires there. All right, this feels so much better. So let's get a typical look here from the side. So man, you can really see some jitter. Some of that may be the overdrive hang up. See these tires just grabbing. Look at that. So if you can eat this up, no problem. All right, put this corner up, get this thing twisted a little, see how this reacts. So we can bite on the front. We have to reposition a hair. There we go. No problem at all, right on up and over. All right, getting a nice back shot here on this climb. Man, I'm just loving these wheels and tires. Just so good looking. So we just creep this down easy. Very nice. All right, we got one last set to look at, so I kind of reset the course a tad. Don't look like these mud paws are gonna have any issue. Get that wrinkle there, nice. So these are the ones with the inserts. Look like they're performing just as good as their smaller counterpart. All right, a little different approach here. See if we can kind of do a wedge climb, if you will. See if we can get these sticky Endura tires to grip. Looks like it. Man, these are super grippy, really sticky. Very nice. All right, we're gonna take one last approach. Ooh, up this corner. See if we can't hook this edge, get some grip. And it looks like we are. These Endura tires Get that back in. Oh man, that's getting stuffed. Just super nice. And right on down. Loving it. All right, had to do one more here. We're gonna take this corner, get twisted up, let these Endura tires do their thing. Man, just sticky icky. Loving them, man. Here we are once again at the end of another successful ground up SCX24 build, and I could not be happier with this little guy. Just fantastic, super challenging little build, but also super satisfying getting everything shoehorned in there. I knew going brushless was going to be a challenge, you know, having an outrunner in there spinning under that interior with everything packed around it, kind of out of sight. So you gotta really have everything where it needs to be because you're not able to really see it too much. But man, it just works fantastic. I'm able to get the battery in and out by hand, no Velcro, plug it in, no tweezers. So just all of it worked out better than expected. And just a great amount of flex there, perfect bias. I mean, the way it came out, just great. And all three sets of these wheels and tires just look fantastic. I said at first these were the IT combo, but as soon as I mounted these up, I changed my mind because these could be the IT as well. And then the brass Endura combo on the truck is just growing on me the more I look at it. A lot of it has to do with these tires. I just love this old school mud paw tread. I think it looks perfect on this truck. But just a fantastic design from Rocky Goat Racing and Adam. And if you haven't checked out their YouTube channel, that is Reactive Terrain RC. So this is the actual storefront if you want to go and pick up one of these Goat Fathers or Ninja Goats or whatever creation is coming next. But if you want to see these guys in action running around a super cool indoor course, check out Reactive Terrain. But just what a neat little design here. You know, nothing like this on the market, this monocoque chassis. Just awesome, awesome. So I'm glad he's bringing something, you know, totally unique and fresh, but definitely bringing a challenge as well. But just could not be happier with it. And just love all the little details that he puts into it. And I cannot wait to see what he comes out with next. So if you're interested in these guys, definitely check out Rocky Goat Racing. It's international shipping, but I had no issues with anything obviously getting here. So no damages, perfect packaging. But again, big thanks to Adam at Rocky Goat Racing. So I think with that, we are gonna call this guy a wrap. And I hope you learned something on this one. I know I learned a lot, and I hope this is gonna help anybody out building one of these. It's definitely gonna inform my Ninja Goat build. And as always, I hope you had fun on the journey. And until next time, thanks for watching.